Welcome to another episode of the Robinson-Hewitt Pod. This is where we talk about the future of technology and what it means to be human in the next era of tech. I'm your host, Alison. I'm a futurist, professional director, anthropologist of emerging technology, and founder of Robinson-Hewitt Consulting. Welcome. So what's on my mind today is a little bit of a follow-up from last week's episode on the future of work. And during that episode, I brought up the Neolithic Revolution, and I want to return to this again because it pulls at another idea that I think is worth exploring a little bit deeper. So to refresh our minds, the Neolithic Revolution is this in a nutshell. Across the globe, at roughly the same point in time, different groups of people in completely separate regions independently began to domesticate plants and animals. There was no shared communication, no global network, and no group chat. It was just the same idea arriving in different places through different people at the same time. But each group brought their own version of domestication, depending on their environment, their resources, and their cultural context. And that shift gave us agriculture, and agriculture gave us civilization as we know it today. And I raise this idea again today because it touches directly on what I want to talk about. And it's this idea of transformation, ideas, and the people who bring those ideas to life. So what is an idea? Where does it come from? And what does it actually take to bring one to life in this particular moment in history? Because when we talk about transformation in a technological sense, we tend to think about it in terms of systems, platforms, and infrastructure. And those things are, of course, important. But the conversation that doesn't happen enough is the one about the person or the groups of people carrying ideas, the ones who are actually doing the transforming themselves. And those two things aren't separate processes. They're happening at the same time for a very specific purpose. So let's look at the current state of play when it comes to ideas and transformation. Digital transformation gets talked about constantly right now, and for good reason. At its core, it describes the integration of digital technology into how organizations operate, how they deliver value, and how they relate to people that they serve. And it involves moving away from legacy systems towards cloud-based infrastructure, data-driven decision-making, AI-powered workflows, and a more agile way of working. For 2026 and beyond, the focus areas are sharpening towards AI-fueled automation, support for hybrid workforces, the side quest of a portfolio career, as well as building systems that are genuinely resilient rather than just efficient. But the standard definition of digital transformation often misses one crucial element, that digital transformation is not purely a technical event. It's also a cultural shift. The organizations and ideas that actually make it through transformation are the ones where the people inside them are willing to examine their own assumptions and move away from the rigid structures and sit with uncertainty long enough to find a better path forward. So the technology is almost never the hard part. It's the human part of transformation that usually gets us stuck. And what I find most of interest when it comes to my own research in this area is what happens on the individual level, and specifically what happens to the people who are generating the ideas, the ones that are shaping the transformation in the first place. It's the founders. The ones who are in the early, unclear, and uncomfortable stages of bringing something new into the world. So I've had the privilege over the course of my career of working with hundreds of tech founders across Aotearoa and New Zealand. I've worked with founders who have turned billions in profit to founders who just have a concept of an idea and everything else in between. And being the anthropologist that I am, I've always been observing, looking out for patterns of behavior and predicting who would make it, who wouldn't, based on the founders themselves. I would watch what ideas were truly inspired and what ideas were being forced into existence purely from ego, and where an idea just needed a few evolutions to actually match the world that we were moving into. And each founder follows a pattern that is unmistakable and uncanny. And I've been through this myself, and I believe that you cannot consult on something you haven't experienced intimately yourself through all the highs and lows of it. So I speak today not only from having researched this extensively, but having also lived through it. So the founder's journey is not abstract to me, and it's worth explaining that if you have an idea that you believe is inspired, or you feel called to do something but you don't know what it is yet, then this is what all founders go through. So hopefully this gives you some guidance so that you don't get stuck like some founders have, including myself. Now, there are deep philosophical, sacred, and ancient frameworks I draw on within this work, and I give credit to those traditions. But today, and for ease of conversation, I want to use a framework that many of you already know, and it's Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. If you're not a writer or a storyteller, here's a very simplified version. The hero's journey is one of the most universal story structures we have. Every transformative story you've ever loved follows some version of it. From Harry Potter to Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, and even The Karate Kid. In every case, an ordinary person receives a call to do something larger. They hesitate, they find guidance, and then they commit to a path that changes them irreversibly. And by the end of the story, they are not who they were at the beginning, and they have something meaningful to show for it. So we take this same structure and we apply it to the founder who has been founded by an idea. And what I want to share today is the early stages of this journey, the stages that take you up to what I call the founder's threshold, where ideas begin to take root, because this is where most people tend to get stuck, and this is where the real work actually begins. So let's get started in starting your own founder's journey today. So let's cover the first 5 stages of getting up to what I call the founder's threshold. So stage 1, it's the ordinary world. And every journey starts here. And it's not a dramatic moment of inspiration, and it's not even in the pitch room yet. It is just ordinary life. This is your routines, your patterns, and your current systems. This is the world before everything changes. So at this stage, everything is about observation. It's about seeing your present reality clearly, including the invisible forces that shape your decisions. This could be the restlessness that you're feeling, the sense of competence without fulfillment, or momentum without any meaning. This is low-grade awareness that something isn't quite fitting anymore, even if you can't name it. So in Harry Potter, this is him living under the stairs and not knowing that he is a wizard yet. This is all before everything happens, and we see him living life full of constraints and restrictions, right? He doesn't know who he is yet. So the reason why this stage matters is because you can't leave a world you haven't fully seen. Awareness precedes meaningful action, and the goal here is not to escape the ordinary world quickly. The goal is to witness it without judgment, to understand it, to notice patterns and assumptions, and the invisible rules that you're operating within. Because those are the things that will either hold you back or become the raw material for what you're actually building. So you know you're ready to move forward from the stage when you see your life clearly without urgency to flee it. This is when gratitude and detachment can coexist at the same time, and when old patterns feel transparent rather than compelling. You don't get swayed by the old things anymore. Stage 2, this is the call to adventure, and this is where something starts to happen in the external. You have a thought, a conversation, or a problem that you can't stop thinking about. This is the call to adventure, and it's the first spark and the invitation to imagine something different. And what's important here is that the call doesn't arrive because you're ready. It arrives because the conditions that are inside you, inside the world, inside the idea itself, have all aligned. And I like to think about the Goonies discovering the treasure map with this. And, no one's looking for the treasure map, but it just appears, and it became impossible for the boys to ignore. It was finally a solution to their problems, right? So at this stage, an idea can be energy. It exists whether you act on it or not, and your job isn't to immediately commit to it, but just to notice it, to let the curiosity guide you rather than to let it pressure you into any sort of movement yet. Some ideas in this stage will fade, some will persist, and some will ask for your attention. So the stage is integrated when the excitement is grounded rather than feverish, and you can start to imagine multiple futures without clinging to one. So this is when an idea starts to feel steady as an invitation rather than a demand. And then we move to stage 3, and this is the refusal of the call. So after the initial spark, there's usually hesitation, and this is totally normal, and in fact, I think it's necessary. So the refusal of the call is when you pause and weigh the idea against your current life. This is where fear arrives, self-doubt arrives, and the rational voice begins listing every practical, financial, and personal reasons why it's not the right time or you shouldn't do it. And I like to think about Luke Skywalker in this situation, where he's hesitating on Tatooine. He wants to go, but he also has responsibilities, fears, and deep attachment to the world he knows, as well as his aunt and uncle. Sad ending for them. So this stage exists because transformation carries real risk, and meeting that risk consciously is part of the process. Fear is information. It tells you where your edges are, what matters to you, and what you stand to lose. but it is not the decision maker itself. The goal here is discernment, to see your fears clearly without letting them decide for you. And you know that you're done with this stage when you can say either yes or no to an idea from a place of peace rather than panic. When the risk feels clear and grounded rather than catastrophic and abstract. And a note to this, you can say no to ideas. Not every idea is meant to stick around. Some are meant to float with you and then bypass you, or they're meant to return later on. Keep note of those ones. And then we have stage 4, which is meeting the mentor. So once you've said yes to the possibility of an idea, you quickly realize that you cannot do everything alone. Meeting the mentor is about receiving guidance without surrendering your authority over the journey. And my favorite example is Karate Kid. So think about Mr. Miyagi and Daniel's son. The mentor does not solve the problems for you, but they help you see what you're capable of. It's the whole wax on, wax off of it all. They offer frameworks, perspective, and proof that the path is able to be navigated. They do not tell you the end result. They shouldn't do that either. And this might look like a conversation with someone who has done something similar, or research that reframes your thinking, or even a framework that gives you the language of something that you've been sensing but can't quite make visible. And the key word here is discernment. Not every mentor is right for you, and not every piece of advice applies. You are still the expert of your own idea. That's the mentor's job, to resource you, not rescue you. And you know the stage is done when you feel supported but self-directed, when guidance builds confidence rather than dependency. And finally, after stage 5, this is crossing the threshold. This is the moment of real commitment. Everything before this is preparation, exploration, internal work. And the threshold is where intention becomes true action, where the idea moves from possibility into the real world. And this is Frodo leaving the Shire. From that moment, there is no clean return to a life that once was. And for a founder, this looks different for everybody. It might be your first draft, a prototype, or you finally post publicly on LinkedIn or social media. Or it could be a conversation where you finally say what you're building. What matters is that this has real-world consequence, something that cannot be unmade. And small steps count here. It's a single post, a conversation with the right person. It's a decision that shifts your trajectory. What matters is the action is real and consequential, not theoretical. Hesitation dressed up as refinement blocks momentum in this area, so action is your proof of commitment. And you've crossed the threshold when you stop debating whether you act and you start learning from what happens when you do. This is when feedback and reality replace speculation, and when your identity begins to shift through behavior rather than intention. And a point to note through my research is that most people never actually get through the first 3 stages. They stay in observation, or they stay inside excitement of the call without moving towards it, or they sit in refusal long enough that the idea eventually goes quiet or goes to somebody else. So choosing action, even imperfect action, places you in a much smaller group. And from there, the journey continues through your lived experience rather than in theory. And if you want to go deeper on this, we have a full breakdown of the founder's journey available for free on our website. We will link it below. Our sort of thinking with this is that you're not only building the future, but you're also learning to tell your own story. So it works in both ways, of your own personal transformation, but also being prepared for when someone finally asks you, tell us your founder's story. So let's think about my futuristic insights and what I'm seeing and what this means for the rest of us. So now that we have an understanding of the mechanics behind the individual aspects of transformation, there's also another part of the puzzle worth bringing into view, especially in the age of AGI. As artificial intelligence grows in computational scale and capability, the ideas it cannot generate, the ones that are required with lived experience, become more valuable and not less. So my theory is this: the greater the reach of AI and computational scale, the greater the depth required of humans working alongside it. So the founders and the leaders who will shape the next era are not simply fast or well-resourced. They are the ones who have done the internal work, who know themselves clearly enough to carry an idea without distorting it, projecting unresolved fears onto it, or abandoning it when the moment becomes difficult. And I want to bring in an image here that sits with this idea of the hero's journey as well, because it captures something important about the next wave of transformation. Stay with me on this idea for a second. So we all know the symbolism of an apple and knowledge, but what happens when an apple falls from the tree and is left on the ground to decay? In that decay, the seed within it is released, returns to the soil, and eventually becomes a new tree, one with its own roots and branches. So there's nothing wrong with the original tree, but the fallen apple, through its decay, becomes the condition for something entirely new, something that didn't exist before. So decay is part of a process of bringing something new into this world. It's something that we don't really talk about. We're conditioned to avoid the messy, uncertain, in-between stages, the things that we call failures, right? We are taught to move past them quickly, but these stages are not incidental to transformation. They are the transformation themselves. So in this stage, in the underground is where the roots form, right? And what happens in the underground will eventually surface. As above, so below. So the founder, when they're building upwards towards visibility and expression, is simultaneously building downwards. They're forming the roots of what one day will hold everything that is up above the ground. Which is why the ideas we need most right now are the ones that are carried with people who have sat in this decay, the ones who have faced their own underworld and not turned away from it, who bring to their work not only their intelligence, their ambition, but also their genuine self-knowledge of what lies beneath the surface. And this brings me to something that I find incredibly hopeful for the next era of ideas. So bringing this all into today. So when we bring this wider idea of digital transformation together with the individual journey of transformation, for those bringing in the new ideas into this world, it becomes clear that this is not a solo process. It's collective. And there's another really niche example from a film that I love that I think will bring all this together. So again, bear with me. Have you seen the movie Rat Race? It's a classic in my repertoire, and it's about a group of strangers who holiday in Las Vegas who are unknowingly entered into a race by a group of wealthy men betting on who will arrive first to claim a prize of $2 million. So the premise is 6 groups race 563 miles from Las Vegas to a storage locker in a train station in Silver City, New Mexico, to claim the prize of $2 million cash. Across the film, each contestant goes through wildly different trials, obstacles, and different forms of chaos. And to spoil the entire film, they all arrive at the locker at the same time. But if we look at the structure of the race itself, the beginning was the same for each contestant, and the destination was fixed. But the journey was theirs alone to navigate. And I will always think about that because what it shows us is that you cannot force your way to the finish line ahead of it being the right moment. Everything has to line up. The internal work, external conditions, and the readiness for the idea itself. And trying to brute force this alignment tends to produce exhaustion rather than breakthrough. And the other element of this is the ending. All of those different journeys, all the individual struggles, and they all arrived at the same time. And when I think about founders and builders who are building the next era, I think it's one of those things of sometimes the destination has to be aligned with everybody else who's building the future with you. Even if you're on the journey, it may seem by yourself, but you are not alone on this journey. The future you're building is the same one that many others are building towards as well. And people all over the world are carrying ideas forward, all starting from different points, but navigating similar terrain. And the saying goes, the journey is the destination itself. But I will add something else to this. If we all arrive at the same place and choose to do something worthwhile with what we've learned and built collectively, then the whole thing means so much more. So my ask for today is this. Be willing to enjoy the journey for what it is teaching you. Be open to the people arriving alongside you. If something isn't aligned to your vision, say no, keep going until you get a yes. And if you're in doubt, think about what your younger version of yourself would need in that moment of darkness. So be adaptable, keep the bigger picture in view. Let the apple fall where it may and let it sit in the decay as long as it needs to. Because when that new tree finally grows, it will carry its own knowledge, its own roots, and its own capacity to nourish others. And that can only come from those who didn't skip sitting in the underworld and growing there first. So if today's episode got you thinking, you can come along and join your journey with us. We post nearly every day on Instagram, sharing our daily insights and inspiration for founders and future-facing leaders. It's a good place to stay curious. And if you're ready to go deeper, you can head over to our website at RobinsonHewitt.com. We work at the intersection of anthropology, emerging technology, and long-term systems change, helping future-facing leaders and founders transform, evolve, and build the next era. If you're still orienting, we have a lot of free resources available on our website. And if you're ready to take the leap, you can check out our services as well. Everything's linked below, and I will see you in the next one. Ciao.